What if your silence was not emptiness, but a language that spoke louder than words? Imagine walking into a room and feeling no need to prove yourself, no desire to fill the air with explanations, no urgency to be noticed. The atmosphere shifts because your presence is already complete. This is the magnetism of solitude, not the isolation of someone abandoned, but the aura of a woman who has chosen to be whole. In a world that often rewards noise and constant availability, the woman who embraces her own silence becomes rare, almost untouchable, like a poem that doesn't need to be read aloud to be felt. Perhaps you have already experienced this in subtle ways. You decline an invitation, not out of bitterness, but because your evening with a book and a cup of tea feels richer than any small talk. You walk alone in a park, and strangers glance at you, sensing something they cannot name. It is not beauty in the conventional sense, but the power of someone who is not begging for an audience. Carl Jung would call this the movement toward individuation, the process by which a person begins to live from the center of their own soul, rather than from the applause or disapproval of others. Solitude becomes less about absence and more about presence, your presence. The psychological impact of such a posture is profound. When a woman stops chasing validation, she radiates a different kind of energy. It is no longer the restless vibration of someone waiting for a message, hoping to be chosen, adjusting herself to fit into another's shadow. Instead, it is the calm pulse of someone anchored in herself. This calmness becomes magnetic precisely because it is scarce. Many men, accustomed to women who overcompensate, sense that something is different. The silence is not rejection, but selection. It communicates, without words, I am here, whole, whether you come closer or not. And that unsettles those who seek control while inspiring those who are ready to meet her as an equal. Jung often wrote that the unconscious speaks through symbols, and solitude is one of them. To withdraw, to rest in oneself, is to enter a symbolic space where the external world loses its hold. In that silence, a woman listens to her own depths, discovering desires she once silenced, dreams she once postponed, wounds she once ignored. This inner work subtly changes how she moves through life. Her steps are more deliberate, her gaze more anchored, her voice steadier. Others may not know why they feel drawn, but they sense that she carries a map to a territory they have not yet explored, the territory of self-possession. There are moments in life that make this transformation visible. After a divorce, when the world expects a woman to collapse, she spends time cultivating her garden, learning a new language, or traveling alone. Instead of shrinking, she expands. After a betrayal, when she could drown in bitterness, she reclaims her evenings for long walks, journaling, or painting. Her silence is not a void, but a canvas on which she paints her rebirth. Friends notice that she seems lighter, even luminous. Strangers catch themselves looking twice, not because of her outfit or her smile, but because of the aura of someone who no longer runs after what does not belong to her. This magnetism of lived silence is not a performance. It cannot be faked because it emerges naturally from the choice to remain faithful to oneself. A woman who is no longer afraid of being alone speaks a different language with her body, her eyes, her presence. She does not chase, and so she is pursued. She does not plead, and so she is respected. She does not shout, and so her quietness echoes longer. The paradox is clear. When she no longer needs to be seen, she becomes impossible to ignore. Maybe you have felt the beginnings of this in your own life. That morning when you woke up and realized you were no longer waiting for his message, no longer checking if someone noticed your absence. That evening when you turned off the lights, sat with yourself, and discovered that the silence was not heavy but liberating. That is the threshold Jung described, the moment solitude shifts from loneliness into individuation. The moment when your worth no longer depends on who stands beside you, but on the depth of who you are when you stand alone. So the magnetism of solitude well lived is not about distance, but about presence. Not about what is missing, but about what is overflowing. It is about becoming so full of your own essence that you no longer bend for crumbs of attention, and that fullness, paradoxically, becomes the very reason why others are drawn to you. It is not seduction in the usual sense, it is resonance. The world feels the vibration of someone who has chosen herself, and that is a music no silence can hide. There is a turning point in a woman's life when the energy she once poured into others begins to flow back into herself. What once was spent on trying to anticipate moods, maintain peace, or earn affection is redirected into rituals of care that nourish rather than deplete. This redirection is not selfishness, but restoration. The same way a river regains strength when it returns to its source, a woman regains her magnetism when her focus shifts inward. The beauty is that this transformation is often quiet, invisible to the outside world at first, yet it radiates in ways that others cannot help but notice. Carl Jung believed that the inner world holds archetypes that, when activated, change the way we move through life. In Solitude, the archetype of the high priestess awakens, she who holds wisdom not by speaking louder, but by listening more deeply. This archetype lives in the woman who dedicates mornings to meditation, who tends to her plants as if tending to her own spirit, who keeps a journal not to impress anyone, but to witness her own becoming. Each of these practices becomes more than a habit. They are doors into a presence that commands respect without demanding it. The psychological effect of this inward turn is profound. When a woman invests in her own growth, her posture changes, her energy shifts, and her presence carries an unspoken message: I am not waiting to be completed. Hobbies that once seemed like small distractions, painting, cooking, dancing, studying, become vessels of power. They teach her patience, rhythm, and joy that come without the need for external applause. This autonomy is not coldness, it is warmth that comes from within. It is the glow of a fire that does not need to be fed by others to remain alive. Imagine the woman who spends her evenings learning a new instrument. She does not play for an audience, she plays for her soul. Or the woman who tends her garden, watching life sprout under her care, mirroring her own renewal. Or the woman who invests time in her physical well-being, walking each morning, not because she wants to be noticed, but because each step makes her feel alive. These are not acts of escape, but of creation. They create a life that feels whole, even in solitude, and this wholeness becomes visible to those who cross her path. Men consciously or unconsciously sense this shift. They may not articulate it, but they feel the difference between a woman who pours all her energy outward seeking validation and a woman who holds her energy inward like a secret flame. The latter does not ask, "Am I enough?" She knows she is. And this quiet certainty unsettles those who depend on her insecurity to feel powerful. At the same time, it attracts those who admire a woman capable of standing in her own light. Her solitude is not emptiness, but a garden, and whoever enters must respect the space already blooming. Jung spoke of individuation as a return to one's essence, an alignment between who we are inside and how we live outside. When attention is turned inward, individuation unfolds. A woman no longer lives as an echo of someone else's needs, but as the voice of her own soul. This alignment creates a magnetic field around her, not visible, but deeply felt. People may say she has changed, though they cannot name exactly how. What they are perceiving is her energy turned from survival into creation, from dependency into sovereignty. The inward gaze also heals wounds. Energy that was once wasted in chasing explanations, in replaying arguments, in trying to fix what was never hers to fix, is reclaimed. She uses that same energy to restore her health, to deepen her knowledge, to rebuild her confidence. Slowly, the parts of her that felt broken begin to weave into something stronger than before. Others might call it resilience, but she knows it is more than that. It is the quiet revolution of turning pain into wisdom. Think of the archetype of the high priestess again. She is not admired because she is available to everyone. She is admired because she has cultivated an inner world so rich that those who approach her feel they are entering sacred ground. Her solitude is her temple. Her hobbies are her prayers. Her rituals are her offerings. This is why men, and even other women, feel drawn to her presence. Not because she asks for attention, but because her attention has become precious. It is not given lightly, and therefore it is valued deeply. So when the energy turns inward, solitude ceases to be a state of lack. It becomes a sanctuary where magnetism is forged. Every choice, every ritual, every hobby becomes a declaration. I am alive, not because someone else sees me, but because I see myself. And that kind of presence cannot be ignored. It is not loud, yet it speaks. It does not chase, yet it invites. It does not beg, yet it attracts. In the quiet work of solitude, a woman becomes the very source of the magnetism others cannot explain, but instinctively respect. Freedom is one of the most captivating qualities a woman can embody, and when it arises from solitude, it carries a weight that cannot be faked. There is a paradox here. The less a woman depends on approval, the more admired she becomes. The moment she no longer waits for validation, she radiates an energy of choice rather than necessity. This is not indifference, it is maturity. It is the quiet recognition that she has walked through storms, carried disappointments, and still found the strength to stand tall. Men sense this strength not in her words but in her posture, her gaze, and her ability to remain centered regardless of who enters or leaves her life. Carl Jung often emphasized that individuation is the process of becoming whole, and wholeness naturally inspires respect. A woman who lives from her center does not need to announce her independence. It emanates from her presence. Small gestures reveal it, the way she enjoys a dinner alone without discomfort, the way she says no without over-explaining, the way she listens without rushing to be understood. These signals of self-possession are what men perceive as maturity. They see a woman who is not trying to fit into their mold, but who has already shaped herself through her own experiences. That kind of freedom draws admiration, even from those who cannot articulate why. The psychological effect is striking. Superficial connections fall away because they cannot survive in the atmosphere of such groundedness. A man who seeks control will find no space to manipulate. A man who seeks entertainment without depth will grow restless. What remains are those who respect, who admire, who long to approach with sincerity. Solitude acts like a filter, separating what drains from what nourishes. The woman who embraces her freedom does not have to chase. Her very energy chooses for her. She is no longer the hunter of love, but the guardian of her own realm. This realm can be understood through the archetype of the queen. The queen does not beg to be recognized. She embodies centrality without effort. People revolve around her, not because she demands loyalty, but because her presence establishes order. For the mature woman, the queen archetype manifests in the way she sets boundaries without resentment, in the way she protects her peace as though it were a kingdom, in the way she receives affection as an offering rather than a rescue. This archetype does not isolate her, it anchors her. Men may fear or admire it, but they cannot ignore it. Examples of this respect appear in daily life. A divorced woman who rebuilds her finances and carves a life she enjoys on her own terms suddenly receives a different kind of attention. Not because she is seeking it, but because her independence commands it. A widow who begins traveling, pursuing art, or joining communities, not to fill a void but to expand her soul, radiates a kind of joy that attracts people of all ages. A single woman who spends her evenings studying, creating, or simply resting instead of waiting for someone's presence gives off a signal. My life is already meaningful. This signal is magnetic precisely because it is rare. There is also an invisible shift that happens when freedom takes root. Anxiety lessens because her sense of worth is no longer tied to unpredictable external validation. Her body relaxes, her smile becomes genuine, her silence less heavy. Men see this not as distance, but as an inexplicable ease. Some are intimidated, mistaking her freedom for disinterest. But those who carry respect in their own hearts recognize the difference. They understand that her solitude is not a wall, but a gate. And only those who approach with authenticity may enter. In Jungian terms, this freedom is a manifestation of individuation at its mature stage. When a woman integrates the lessons of her past, reconciles with her inner shadows, and no longer seeks completion in another, she becomes a whole person standing beside another whole person, rather than half searching for half. This balance is what inspires true respect. Men may admire beauty, charm, or youth for a moment, but freedom coupled with maturity is what keeps them captivated beyond appearances. So the paradox remains. The more she releases the need to be chosen, the more she is chosen by those who matter. The less she seeks to be admired, the more her authenticity commands admiration. The less she explains herself, the more her presence speaks volumes. This is the essence of the queen archetype in Solitude. Not a woman isolated in a tower, but a woman who sits at the center of her own life, allowing only those worthy of her peace to step closer. Her freedom is not a rejection of love. It is the soil where love that honors her can finally grow. There is a particular shift in the male gaze when it encounters a woman who is truly self-sufficient. Some interpret her solitude as coldness, as if her calm presence must mean disinterest. Others feel unsettled, almost intimidated, because her independence mirrors something they have not yet resolved within themselves. Carl Jung would describe this reaction as the confrontation with the shadow. What men fear in a woman's self-possession often reveals the unfinished parts of their own psyche, the insecurities they project onto her strength. To face a woman who does not compete for attention is to face the silence of one's own incompleteness. Consider how often women are expected to perform availability, to reply quickly, to prove affection, to reassure constantly. When a woman does not play this role, when she neither chases nor justifies, some men experience discomfort. They misinterpret her stillness as rejection because they are accustomed to validation as a mirror of their worth. In reality, what they encounter is not rejection, but sovereignty. Her solitude says, without arrogance, "I am whole, whether or not you choose to stand beside me." For a man who seeks power through dependency, this truth is unbearable. For a man who seeks authenticity, it is magnetic. The difference lies in how men process their own shadows. One man may walk away, convincing himself that she is distant or unfeeling. Another may pause, realizing that her presence challenges him to grow, to bring his own wholeness rather than demand hers. In Jungian terms, the self-sufficient woman activates the projection of anima in a man, the feminine side of his psyche. If he has not reconciled with it, he may respond with fear or control. If he has, he recognizes in her a mirror of what he too is searching for: integration, not possession. This transformation of the male perspective often becomes visible in small interactions. A woman declines a last-minute invitation without guilt, and a certain type of man becomes frustrated, interpreting it as an insult. Yet another man respects the boundary and admires her clarity. She enjoys an evening alone rather than filling it with meaningless company, and one man sees her as aloof, while another sees her as deeply grounded. The same action, but two very different responses, one born of insecurity, the other born of respect. It is not her solitude that defines the outcome, but the maturity of the one who beholds it. There is also a psychological effect on those who stay. Men who are drawn to a self-sufficient woman find themselves behaving differently in her presence. They are more intentional, more thoughtful, more aware that her attention is a privilege, not a guarantee. Her solitude establishes an unspoken standard. Attention must be genuine, or it will not last. This standard does not come from demands or ultimatums, but from the quiet strength of someone who no longer bargains with her worth. In this way, her self-possession becomes not only attractive but transformative, reshaping the behavior of those willing to rise to her level. Jung's concept of the shadow helps explain why this dynamic is so powerful. The qualities that men repress, fear of abandonment, feelings of inadequacy, unresolved wounds, often surface when they encounter a woman who does not feed their ego. Her independence exposes the cracks in their own foundation. For some, this creates distance. For others, it sparks growth. In this sense, the self-sufficient woman does not merely attract, she reveals. She becomes a mirror, and what men see depends on what they have the courage to face within themselves. This is why solitude, when lived with authenticity, shifts the entire field of attraction. It is no longer about appearances or charm, but about psychological depth. A woman who no longer competes for attention embodies a strength that unsettles superficial desires. She forces a choice, either retreat into old patterns or step forward with maturity. In both cases, she loses nothing because her sense of self is not tied to who stays or leaves. Her magnetism endures because it is rooted in wholeness, not in need. So the transformation of the male gaze before female solitude is not merely about attraction or intimidation. It is about revelation. It reveals to the man his own relationship with dependence, with respect, with the feminine within himself. Some will run from the mirror, calling her cold. Others will lean closer, realizing they have finally found someone who does not play games, someone whose strength invites them into their own. And in that space, attraction becomes more than desire. It becomes recognition. Solitude, when lived fully, becomes more than a season of life. It becomes a wellspring of magnetism that endures. Time spent alone renews the body, clears the mind, and restores the soul. A woman who learns to sit in her own company without fear discovers a vitality that cannot be imitated. She sleeps more peacefully, chooses her commitments with clarity, and approaches each day with a quiet assurance. This renewal is not a performance. It is the natural outcome of energy redirected toward what truly nourishes her. And that nourishment radiates outward, often attracting more genuine connections than when she was desperately seeking them. There is a shift in the rhythm of life when solitude is embraced. Moments once feared as empty become sacred. A morning coffee at a quiet table, a long walk without conversation, an evening spent writing or creating, these no longer feel like gaps to be filled, but gifts of presence. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, and solitude is the soil in which that process thrives. In solitude, the fragments of a woman's story weave together. Her past wounds no longer dictate her worth. Her future no longer defines her urgency. She lives in the fullness of now, and that presence carries a beauty deeper than appearance. The impact on those around her is subtle, yet undeniable. Friends may notice that she listens more deeply, that she no longer rushes to please, that her laughter has a weight of sincerity. Strangers may notice her posture, the calm in her eyes, the way she moves without restlessness. Men especially sense the difference. They may not name it, but they feel it. The magnetism of a woman who chooses company rather than needs it. This choice makes her rare. In a world filled with noise and constant reaching, she is the one who rests, and in that rest, she becomes luminous. Stories of women who found love after finding themselves first illustrate this truth. A woman who lived alone for years after divorce suddenly discovers companionship, not because she sought it desperately, but because she cultivated a life so full that love became a complement, not a rescue. Another woman, widowed and weary, begins to paint, to travel, to rebuild. Her solitude transforms her sorrow into depth, and one day someone sees not her loneliness, but her light. Time and again, the pattern repeats. The women who no longer fear being alone often become the ones most deeply loved. Not because solitude guarantees romance, but because solitude shapes authenticity, and authenticity is irresistibly magnetic. This magnetism is not temporary. It does not fade with age, nor depend on constant affirmation. It grows stronger with every choice that honors self-respect, every ritual that nurtures peace, every boundary that protects dignity. It is the magnetism of a woman who does not beg for attention, who does not shrink to be accepted, who does not bargain with her essence. Instead, she carries herself as whole, and this wholeness becomes a beacon. Those who are drawn to her are not chasing a role or an image. They are responding to the depth of her being. Perhaps this is the secret Jung hinted at. Solitude is not an exile, but a homecoming. It is the place where a woman remembers who she is beyond roles, beyond relationships, beyond the gaze of others. From that place, she steps into the world not with need, but with presence. And presence is the most magnetic force of all. She does not have to strive for it, because it flows naturally from within. She does not have to guard it jealously, because it cannot be taken. Solitude has carved it into her very being. So when you think of solitude, think not of emptiness, but of fullness. Think of a woman walking into a room, not asking to be chosen, but already chosen by herself. Think of the aura of someone who has touched her own depths and returned with light. That is why some women become more attractive in solitude. Their magnetism is not borrowed, not begged for, not dependent. It is born from the sacred choice to be whole first, and when the world sees it, it cannot look away.